Hey everybody, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going to be tackling a topic that I think we all kind of ponder and, think about quite a bit, and that is God's love. And, not just love because he has to love. He's God. He's supposed to love us kind of love.
Right.
But like that deeper level, Skinny chooses to love us even when we're kind of a mess kind of love.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's been on my mind a lot lately, too. And I think for this dive, we've got two really interesting sources that approach this from very different angles.
Okay.
We've got some verses from Ephesians 1,
Mm-hmm.
Classic, really powerful stuff.
Right.
And then we've got a devotional from the Apostolic Faith Church that's much more personal, more about how this plays out in our everyday lives.
I love that combination.
Yeah.
It's like looking through a telescope and a microscope at the same time.
Exactly.
You get like the grand cosmic view, and then you get the close-up personal one.
That's a great way to put it.
So Ephesians chapter 1, verses 4 and 5 is like bam, right out of the gate. God chose us, set his heart on us before the world even began.
It's incredible.
He decided way back then that we would be his kids, adopted into his family. It wasn't like an afterthought.
No, not at all.
And what's fascinating to me is that word predestined.
Yeah.
Right. We often hear that and we think like fate.
Yeah.
Like it's all set in stone. But Ephesians says it was done according to the good pleasure of his will. Like it was the delight for God to choose us, not an obligation.
Exactly. And that's where I think that devotional really hits home. It uses this analogy of a mother's love for her child.
Right.
Even when that kid is being a kid,
Yeah.
Wiping off kisses, squirming away. God's love is like that, it's freely given.
Mm-hmm.
There are no strings attached, even when we push back.
Yeah, and it's like that story in the devotional about the little grandson who kept wiping off his mom's kisses.
Oh, yeah.
We chuckle, but how often are we doing the same thing to God? He's showering us with love, and we're too busy, too distracted, maybe even too afraid to, receive it fully.
I think that's a really powerful image, and it makes you think, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
About how we might be missing out on the fullness of God's love because we're so focused on, just our own stuff.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that, we all need to hear, especially if we're wrestling with, feelings of unworthiness or doubt. God's love isn't contingent on our performance or our ability to be good enough.
Right.
It's simply there, offered freely, whether we accept it or not. But that brings up a big question for me.
Okay.
If God's love is this constant, this unwavering force, how do we even begin to grasp it?
That is the question, isn't it?
I think Ephesians gives us some clues. The language that it uses is almost overwhelming all spiritual blessings. Redemption through his blood, abounding towards us in all wisdom and prudence.
Yeah, it's like trying to describe the ocean, by scooping up a thimbleful of water.
Right. There's that sense of abundance, like when it talks about the riches of his grace. It's not just a little bit of grace, it's riches, overflowing.
Overflowing.
But how do we even begin to tap into that, to experience it in a real way?
Well, I think the devotional brings it down to earth a bit. It uses this very simple act, a mother's kiss, to represent God's constant outpouring of love. And then it reminds us that we have a choice. We can wipe it away, we can ignore it, or we can lean in, receive it, and let it transform us.
And that's where the spirit of wisdom and revelation comes in, right?
Right.
It's one thing to know God loves us intellectually.
Yeah.
But Ephesians is saying something more.
Yeah.
It's about having that love become real, something we experience deeply, something that changes how we see the world.
Absolutely.
So maybe the question isn't so much about how we grasp God's love, but more about how we open ourselves up to it. It's like tuning into a frequency, right?
Yeah.
The signal's always there, but we have to adjust our receiver to pick it up.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah, and I think that's the challenge for all of us, isn't it?
It is.
To quiet the noise in our lives, to let go of our preconceived notions, and to simply open ourselves to the possibility of experiencing God's love in a new and transformative way.
And that's where this idea of choosing God comes in, right? It's not just about passively receiving his love,
right,
but actively choosing him in return.
Like, okay, God, I see you.
Yeah.
I hear you.
I choose you.
I choose you.
Exactly. And maybe that's the key to unlocking those riches of his grace, to experiencing the fullness of this love in our lives.
Yeah, it's a two-way street. It's a relationship, a dance.
It is.
Exactly. And like any good dance, it requires both partners to be fully present, fully engaged. So how do we do that?
Yeah.
How do we choose God in a way that feels authentic and transformative?
Well, the devotional brings up this idea that choosing God starts with recognizing how he already sees us.
Okay.
It talks about how he's not just our Father and Creator, but our friend.
And that really struck me too, because friend implies a choice, right? You choose your friends, and for God to choose us as friends when he knows all of our flaws, all of our mess-ups.
It's amazing.
That's powerful.
It is. It flips the script, doesn't it?
Yeah.
We often think we have to, clean ourselves up, become worthy before God could possibly want to be friends with us. But Ephesians tells us that we're holy and blameless before him in love because of Christ.
Right.
Not because of anything we've done.
So it's like the friendship's already there on offer.
It is.
We don't have to earn it. We just have to accept it, which is maybe harder than it sounds because it requires a level of trust.
It does. Letting go of control. Because if we're truly friends with God, it means surrendering to his will, his plan for our lives.
Right.
And that can be scary, especially when we don't understand it.
But that's where faith comes in, right? Trusting that even when things are tough, even when we don't see the whole picture, God's got us.
Yeah.
And that trust, that surrender, that's a huge part of choosing him.
It is. It's like that image from the devotional, the mother patiently kissing her son even when he resists.
Right.
God's not going to force himself on us.
Right.
He keeps offering his love, his friendship, but we have to choose to lean in.
So how do we do that in a practical sense? If we're not literally wiping off kisses, how do we choose God in our everyday lives?
Well, Ephesians talks about being filled with the Spirit. Letting God's love guide our thoughts, our words, our actions. And the devotional really emphasizes having thankful hearts.
Okay.
Recognizing all the ways God is already blessing us, even the small stuff.
So it's about awareness, being present to God's presence in our lives.
Right.
And then letting that awareness overflow into how we treat other people, how we approach our work, how we face challenges.
It's like letting God's love be the filter through which we see the world. And I think that's where the real transformation happens.
Right.
It's not just about feeling good or being religious.
Right.
It's about becoming more loving, more compassionate, more Christ-like in everything we do.
And that's something I struggle with sometimes.
Yeah.
I can get so caught up in trying to be good, to follow all the rules, that I forget about the heart of it all, which is love.
I think we all struggle with that.
Yeah.
It's easy to get bogged down in the doing and lose sight of the being.
Yeah.
But the devotional reminds us that God's not looking for perfection. He's looking for connection. He wants us to come to him as we are messy and flawed.
Right.
And let his love fill in the cracks.
That's such a freeing thought.
It is, isn't it?
We don't have to have it all figured out. We don't have to be perfect. We just have to show up, open our hearts, and let God do the rest.
And maybe that's the key to unlocking that hope of his calling that Ephesians talks about.
You're right. We've been talking about choosing God in the present. But Ephesians points us towards something even bigger, something future-oriented.
Right, like this grand adventure God's inviting us on. And the hope is not just about getting to some destination,
Right.
but about who we become along the way, how we're transformed by his love.
And what we're able to accomplish with him.
Exactly.
Ephesians talks about the riches of the glory of his inheritance in the saints. It's like this untapped potential within each of us, just waiting to be unleashed by God's power.
It makes me think of that quote, what would you attempt to do if you knew you could not fail?
Right.
What if we approached life with that kind of boldness, knowing that with God, even our failures can be redeemed, used for something good?
That's the kind of hope that can move mountains.
It is.
The kind of hope that fuels our passions, empowers us to make a difference in the world.
Exactly. It's not just about sitting around waiting for heaven. It's about bringing a little bit of heaven down to earth through our actions, our choices, our love.
And, the devotional reminds us that we're not alone in this. God is with us every step of the way, guiding us, encouraging us, cheering us on like a good friend. He's there to celebrate our victories and pick us up when we fall.
He is, but we have to do our part right. We have to choose to walk with him, to listen to his voice, to let his love shape our lives.
It's a daily choice,
Right.
a moment-by-moment surrender.
And maybe, just maybe, that's what the hope of his calling really boils down to. It's not about some far-off future reward. It's about the joy of walking in step with God today, right now, and seeing what incredible things he can do through us.
As we've been talking about choosing God and this idea of his calling, it makes me think about that line in Ephesians about the eyes of your understanding being enlightened. It's like God's love doesn't just, warm our hearts,
Right.
but it illuminates our minds. It helps us to see things in a new light.
That's a really good point. Yeah, it's like we're given this new perspective, this deeper understanding of ourselves, of the world and our place in it.
hmm And maybe that's a big part of what the hope of his calling is all about.
Right.
It's not just about, knowing what we're supposed to do,
Yeah.
but it's about seeing the why behind it, the purpose, the potential for good.
Absolutely.
And you know what else struck me in that Ephesians passage?
Okay.
It talks about the inheritance we have as God's children.
Mm-hmm.
Not just, some future heavenly reward, but something we can access now.
You mean like those spiritual blessings Ephesians keeps mentioning?
Yeah, like we've got this treasure chest, overflowing with grace and wisdom and strength,
Oh, right.
all just waiting for us to claim it.
It's all right there.
Exactly. And I think that's what gives our lives direction, that sense of purpose,
Mm-hmm.
knowing that we're not just, wandering aimlessly,
Yeah.
but we're part of something much bigger, something eternal.
It's like we're each given a piece of the puzzle,
Right.
a unique role to play in God's grand design. And when we embrace his love, we start to see how our piece fits into the whole.
It's like that image of the church being the body of Christ that we talked about earlier. We're all interconnected,
Right.
each with our own gifts and talents,
Mm-hmm.
working together to build something beautiful and lasting.
And the devotional reminds us that this isn't some heavy burden, it's
Right.
an impossible task.
So it's not like a demanding boss,
Yeah.
cracking the whip.
No, he is a loving father, a close friend walking alongside us,
Right.
guiding us, cheering us on.
And he knows our limitations.
He does.
He's not asking us to be perfect, just to be willing,
Right.
to open our hearts to trust him, to take that next step, even when it's scary.
Because that's where the real adventure lies, isn't it?
Mhm.
Stepping out in faith, knowing that even if we stumble, God's got us. And that's a hope worth clinging to, a hope that can sustain us through anything life throws our way.
I think that's a beautiful way to sum it up.
Yeah. Yeah.
The hope of God's calling isn't about achieving some far-off goal. It's about the journey itself. The transformation that happens when we choose to walk with him day by day, moment by moment.
That's it. So for anyone listening who's feeling lost or uncertain, maybe even a little hopeless, remember this. You are loved.
Yes.
Deeply and unconditionally. You have a purpose, a calling, a place in God's grand story, and he is inviting you to join him on this incredible adventure, to experience the riches of his grace, to discover the joy of walking in step with him, and to see the world transformed by his love.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. May you continue to explore the depths of God's love and discover the boundless hope he offers.